Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man whose first goal is to find Tyler Whitney, though what he does after that is up to him.
Tim Longo.
I
felt real bad about it.
Yeah, we'll talk about what you did to Tyler Whitney later, what you could have done with Tyler Whitney. We'll find out which is which in this case, and how many ways you can fail from there. We are this week tackling a third and I think final rotoscoped game. Really extraordinary game from 1997 called The Last Express, also made by Jordan Mechner. We talked about doing some others, but they felt like they didn't do something new really from the other two games we had played. This one definitely does something new and is worth talking about totally separately from our rotoscoping thing. I mean, I was definitely thinking, should we really play just talk about it for one night? It feels like we could play this whole game and talk about it multiple weeks. So we'll see, how much we get to this week, because I feel like there's a lot here, just scratching the surface. So we talked about Jordan Mechner last week and Broderbund last week. So we're covered. If you want to hear about that, about those that, him and the publisher, go back to that. But this came out in 1997, a year from which we've played GoldenEye 007, Diablo, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and Fallout. Mm-hmm. So those are the games we've played already. The most notable title that came out this year, and which was in competition with and mostly won the Game of the Year awards for adventure games, was Curse of Monkey Island.
Oh, wow. That really puts it in time for me. So there's a lot to talk about then, because I actually did a little bit of testing on that game. Wow. Wait, Curse? I'm getting all my monkey. Yeah, Curse. Yeah, that was number three.
That's the third one. That's the first one that Jonathan... What's the one Jonathan and Larry made? I don't know. If
Jonathan Larry, yeah. Bill
Jonathan Ackley and Larry Ahern. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The other one this year that is of note is Riven.
Okay. Yeah.
So
is that the one that's the second one?
That's the second Myst game, and that's one I played.
That one, right?
And in fact, I think I streamed it. So is my recollection. Yeah, that's quite a game. I think I started streaming when we were playing Myst. Other games from this year, just to kind of rattle them off: Quake, Star Wars Jedi Knight, Dark Forces 2, Outlaws, a couple of LucasArts titles there, in addition to CMI. Turok, Shadow Warrior, Hexen 2, Duke Nukem, Postal. I don't know why we mentioned that. I actually just went back to an old episode. I was like, let me find another game from 97, get the list from there. Age of Empires, Final Fantasy VII, Wing Commander, Prophecy, which was, I think, the only one of those I played. XVT, the one you tested. Colony Wars on the consoles, Interstate 76, Mario Kart 64, Diddy Kong Racing, Grand Theft Auto, Gran Turismo. Grand Theft Auto, I think, was PC as well. And the original Oddworld, another game we may at some point play. Another sort of adventure game. Different sort of adventure game. Closer to a platformer, but it's definitely a different sort of game. Might be something to talk about there someday. So that's to set it in its time. We'll get that out of the way so we have plenty of time to talk about the game. What's your history with this game?
Nothing. Yeah, I thought that I must have dabbled with it, because now that you're putting it in its time, especially because Curse of Monkey Island was in in the sort of like consciousness of the company for all of us, and so playing any of the other adventure games that were coming out would have been happening in the test pit, and there'd be interest. And so I remember the buzz about it. And I remember the, Jordan Mechner part of, legacy of it, if you will. But yeah, no, I don't think I'd purchased it, or we played it in the test pit and talked about it, or I watched somebody else play it. This cracking this open was definitely a fresh experience. What about you?
Well, I did not play it at the time. I had just, I started at LucasArts at the very beginning of 1998. And at that time, at first I was staying in a hotel near the company, but then I had an apartment, but I had no furniture. All my stuff was still with my then wife in Philadelphia, and didn't come out until like August. So I had nothing in my apartment. I don't even think I remember. I must have had a futon or a couch or something, but I had something to sleep on, and that was about it. I had no computer. I had almost nothing in the kitchen. I didn't have a table, so like I feel like I had a couch, and not even a library card yet. So I was generally staying late at work and playing games, just stuff from the library. But the adventure game I was playing, I played some LucasArts adventure games I hadn't played, but I didn't go looking for other adventure games at the time. I know I played Curse of Monkey Island then, and that was the first game I played as a LucasArts employee. And I played some other things that I had never gotten around to, like Sam and Max. I don't think I had played before, and things like that. So I was filling out my LucasArts bona fides, mostly as far as adventure games go. And for whatever reason, this one, I think I even knew about it, and I was like, I should play that someday. And then that day just never came.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's kind of what happened there. And then in 2000, well, I don't know, sometime around the iPad, it came out for the iPad. And I was like, oh, cool, I should get this. And I got it for my iPad. And I
remember that.
Yeah, I played the first bit, basically the first puzzle. And so the implementation on the iPad, while I think pretty faithful, has some things you can kind of turn on or off as you want. And one of them is to basically turn all the highlights on the screen, which is by default. So you have all the arrows on the screen all the time. And then what was the other thing? And then of course, like that first puzzle, I kept failing. I'm like, what am I doing? And it was so alien to me that I think I had just started at Bethesda at the time. And I was just like, I think I'm not in the right place to play this game right now. And I just never opened it again. So I was like, oh, I remember this game and what it looked like and reviews and things. I remembered all of that, but I had no experience with it. And I was like, well, I haven't played an adventure game in a while. I'm going to need some serious focus. And then I probably forgot about it, to be honest. I only remembered I had it when we decided to play it. And I don't recommend it playing on a modern iPad, because whoever reported it didn't manage like CPU speed, and it plays too fast. It's not ridiculously fast, but it's fast. And some things might be very difficult to play. So yeah, that's my prior experience. It's kind of funny because as a fan of Mechner's other games, I may not have connected him though to Prince of Persia at the time. That's hard to say because I think the movie came out around then. Anyway, who knows? So that's my history there. But you said Curse of Monkey Island, comparisons are kind of really set it in time for you. You want to talk about that? We should probably talk about the comparisons with the other adventure games, or at least talk about adventure games of that time.
Yeah, I think it's very applicable. Yeah. Well, I mean, what I meant when I said that was just more of my own history of placing it on okay, if it came out this year, then I can kind of mentally put myself on what else in that time.
Okay.
But as far as the importance of for those who don't know, the importance of Curse of Monkey Island versus 1 and 2 is that's when, I guess I'll say, I don't know, more traditional animation art, 2D animation art was brought into the Monkey Island, so they had the fidelity to be able to, and Bill Tiller was the art director on that, I believe, and he's got a very unique and awesome style of art. I think I forget who the lead animator was, but it was very traditional. It was like watching a cartoon, an animated.
I know who the lead animator is because he left to move to Spain or something, and he sold his car, which was like a beautiful BMW at the time, but I can't remember his name. He also was the lead animator on Day of the Tentacle.
Oh, okay, yeah, just the name's escaping me. But
yeah, it's not coming to me either.
Yeah,
I'll put it in the show notes though for people who may know or follow.
Well, I only bring it up in that I think that we often talk about the forks in the road, and it's interesting that this is 97 that this game came out because, and what other adventure games were out at the time, because it's crazy to me that adventure games are still experimenting at this point, this late. It's actually quite late, even though it doesn't sound like it. 97. Most of you were not born yet, but still, like to have Last Express, and which we'll talk about more in a bit, to have Curse of Monkey Island, which was like the next. I think it's fair to say that was like the next big step for LucasArts adventure games as far as visuals and interface.
It was also a final step.
Yeah, that's true for 2D. Yeah, for sure.
It was the last Scum. It was the last Scum game specifically.
Oh, was it? Okay, yeah. So last Scum game, but also like probably the last 2D game. Yes. Grim and then
right, and LucasArts went electric, right? So 3D only from then on. The next year, in fact, Grim Fandango came out. So
yeah. So there was a big shift happening. Yeah, and there was, but then also like you said, Riven. So FMV and CG pre-rendered or pre-rendered CG background kind of adventure games are still happening. Sierra, we didn't look up Sierra.
We didn't look up Sierra, but I would
it's
say there
probably like Phantasmagoria.
Yeah, and actually, absolutely, Phantasmagoria would have come out in 97 as well. I'll check that, but I'm fairly certain that's true.
It's which is
right around then.
Proves the point even more because Sierra had been around for so long, and the reason I sort of jokingly say Phantasmagoria is that
it's 95.
They were trying to still figure out if they could pivot adventure games to survive, right? Because they were
Sins of the Fathers probably came out here too.
Yeah, and those were pretty well received, well written. Yeah, the Gabriel Knight games. Yeah, so they were basically Sierra games were becoming kind of moodier and darker, right? Yeah, because they were trying to appeal, I guess, to Quake's coming out and things like that. So how do you change? But
even more than that, I think you have an audience which may have been playing the other games as younger people, and they're aging, and exactly. I mean, I haven't aged, but they're aging, and so they're trying more mature themes as a way to keep the genre alive, and also as as natural maturation of the, not just of the audience, but of the medium. People want to experiment and push, and tell more novelistic stories, maybe, or what have you. Develop character more. Make character more, less goofy. Not to pick.
Yeah, they're not as playful, and the humor isn't as. Yeah, it's not as much. Adventure games in those days for both Sierra and LucasArts were much closer to sort of the cartoon approach, I think, even though they were pixelated. But and that's why I think Curse of Monkey Island was still such a for me, I think an important game for adventure games because it's such a cool
it looks great
looking game, and it animates so well, and it's just it's like the perfect Monkey Island game in my mind, even though the others are classics,
right?
But then you have this and another experiment. I just, until we started playing it for the podcast, I hadn't realized how much of an experiment that's what I'm calling it, of course, but how different it really is. I'm trying to find it. I can't. I should have looked it up, spent more time on it. I don't know if you found it, but do we know how long this game took to make?
We do. Let me give you some additional details because I spent a fair amount of time down the rabbit hole with this one. Because of some health issues, I haven't been able to sit a lot and play on even a laptop. It's kind of not comfortable with a mouse to lie down and play it. So I was reading stuff about it on my iPad. So it took 4 years to make with a $5 million budget. It sold 100,000 copies,
Oof.
which was far less than the million or so copies it would have needed to sell. For comparison, in today's dollars, that 5 million would be 11 million today.
Yeah.
The people who, it was a team of between 30 and 40, which is large. Obviously not all the time, not the whole 4 years was it, that many people. And of course they also had, a film crew filming, I believe in France. So, they were also paying for a director and assistant director, and cinematographer and all of that. They did the sound work at Zoetrope Studios. Familiar with that name?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Francis Coppola.
Yep. Which was in San Francisco at the time. Not at the winery, which I don't think had yet been established.
And so it looks like Smoking Car Productions was also in San Francisco.
That's correct. Yeah.
I'm reading here. Yeah.
Yep, that's right. So they had a relatively high cost of living, but like other adventure game developers of the time were not paying their people, top dollar. It wasn't until the .com, boom, that salaries in the games industry had to raise up. Just saying. The one other thing I wanted to mention was it was co-written with Jordan Mechner by Tommy Pierce, who was a producer and in film. She produced a few films. She sadly died. I don't have the date here, but quite some time ago, like 2004, I believe. She was the wife of Doug Carlston, who was one of the founders of Broderbund.
Okay.
So those are all the things I got from reading a very good long interview with the producer and the lead programmer by Chris Remo on Game Developer that was published in 2008, which I have to say was one of the most interesting interviews about game development I've read in some time. So it's worth taking a look. I'll put put that in the show notes as well. It was quite
well. Yeah, and it's too bad that it didn't do better, but it was fairly critically. It
was critically very well acclaimed.
Acclaimed, yeah.
The big thing that killed it was Broderbund was acquired by the Learning Company the month after it came out.
So they just buried it.
Yeah, so 2 months after it came out, you couldn't buy it. Because they basically stopped shipping it.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Yeah, so they got caught up in. These things are cyclical, but it got caught up in sort of one of the storms of the game industry. So I know that people who are on the Discord are well aware of the storm that the industry is currently in. This was a different sort of thing, but it was Broderbund had come to the end of its time and got sold off to the Learning Company with all its assets, and they shifted to educational games. At that point, Broderbund as a brand didn't die for quite a while longer, but it shifted to be purely educational titles, which has never been where the money is, because the kids don't have the money, the parents have the money, and the kids don't want to play those games. So that's kind of what happened there. Edutainment has been a thing that has been tried many times and has a hard time breaking through. Okay, I think that's everything I have to contripute about all of that nonsense.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. Yeah. Well, it's just I feel like both of us, Another World and Prince of Persia were pretty obvious games that we knew we were going to need to play for the podcast someday. Mm-hmm. I feel like this one has caught both of us off guard.
Yeah. That is absolutely true.
As far as it's actually very important we play this game. And I'm also looking on the wiki, and yes, I'm just mining wiki right now, but it's been in multiple lists for top essential graphic adventure games of all time.
At one time it was number one, unlike PC Gamer's best adventure games of all time. Yeah,
so, and being a fan of adventure games myself, it's kind of I now kick myself that I never did play it. Because it is so unique and so different, and delightfully so in that regard, rotoscoping aside. So yeah, I mean, we've talked off and on about if we were to play another adventure game and what it would be, and do we need to really? So this is like a weird happenstance of
we kind of fell into this one for sure.
Yeah, but I think it's good that we're playing it because it's really.
One other thing, it shipped on 3 CDs, so it would have been expensive to publish at that time. Like those came down quite a lot over the next couple of years, but in 1997, like I looked it up because I was curious. Like CMI must have been more than one. I was just thinking about like the animation in particular, like how much space that would have taken up. And because they had some large full screen animations, as I recall.
There's a lot of audio too.
And there's a ton of audio. Yeah, of course. In any later LucasArts adventure game. And that's shipped on 2, and this one was three CDs.
Myst, I think, was 2, right?
Myst, I feel like Myst was 1.
Was it? I feel like there was a disc change. I mean, maybe you're right. Yeah. So the fact that Myst was 1.
I mean, they crunched down.
Those videos were tiny.
I'm pretty sure. I'm going to look it up now. But I think that was a 1 disc game.
I forgot.
Single CD. Riven was the one that was really out of bounds because my recollection was 6. And Baldur's Gate was 5. Baldur's Gate a little later than this.
Well, you mentioned Final Fantasy VII.
That was 4, I believe. 3 or 4. So big deal. Yeah. Wing Commander 2, Wing Commander Prophecy also would have been maybe a couple of discs because they actually had a branching narrative inside their flight simulation game. I think that was kind of the thing with those, and it was FMV.
A lot of video.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So. Yep. Yeah, it was a wild time. Yeah, and costs on those drives on those materials hadn't really come down. They were cheaper than they were when Myst came out, but they were not cheap. So, and it was only a little bit later that they became cheaper. They were always expensive if you were paying for materials from PlayStation, for example, from Sony. Anybody who had a disc based system at that time, you were paying Sony or whomever to actually publish the discs, and they would charge, I believe it was $20 to publish it, $20 per disc. I'm sure it was different for Final Fantasy VII, but it was But if you were just on 1 disc, it was pricey. So anyway, I remember talking about cost of goods a lot with Darren back then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, different time. I mean, no wonder the games industry was so small.
Yeah,
there were so few companies then, right?
Yeah,
digital era has helped.
Well, we're trying to reattain those numbers today. To get that small again.
Oof! Too soon.
It's a dark time.
Yeah, there's an equilibrium.
I have a black streak in my
yeah.
But it's a bloodbath out there. Anyway, let's get back. Speaking of bloodbaths, let's get back to the game.
Nice. Wow.
Let's talk about that first puzzle and kind of use that as our entryway into everything. I want to know his name is Robert, right? Robert Cath?
Cath is right. Robert sounds right.
I think it's Robert. Voiced, by the way, by the actor who played Billy Loomis's father in the Scream movies. Deep cut for you.
Okay.
I've spent a lot of time. I did way more research on this game than we ever do. I even looked up, I've never heard of Epernay in France. What's that about? Oh, look at that. Historically, that's where champagne was stored to be traded elsewhere from all the surrounding countryside. Oh my God.
Oh my gosh.
I went deep.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing, the fact that you could go, I think that there's a quick thread to pull on there, because the fact that you could go deep So, like, if we think of Curse of Monkey Island, or any of the other adventure games that we're talking about, they're usually in, especially the Sierra games, they're in their own microcosm of a world, basically.
Right.
Like the game is creating the context for the characters, the world, everything, right? It's not often Earth or some historical time on Earth. It's not real people, especially with something like Grim Fandango. It's like you're going to be delivered all the things you need to know about the game right here. But like...
And it should be said, something like Grim Fandango was lauded because it drew from a new source of sort of folklore and religion, let's say, just a new source of setting. These sorts of settings were often like, oh, it's the pirate era. Like, or we're in space exploration, or we're in a haunted house, or whatever.
Yeah. Very, very two-dimensional and it's simplistic. But I think the point, like I'm also kind of like looking at some of the wiki stuff as you're talking about Robert Kath, and the fact that they're not only just the historical context for when the game takes place, which we'll get to, I'm sure, as an additional topic, but just the fact that every character has quite a bit of a backstory going on that happened before the game starts.
Right.
Including
Robert,
it's referring to, and they refer to it a lot because there's like this thing with him being suspected for a murder, and he's a doctor, but he knows the character we're about to talk about, Tyler. So you're immediately like, I feel like, and to be honest, it's a little bit overwhelming when you start the game because
it is
because it is so like it's such a simulation of real life in a way. That's not what I want to say, but it's what's coming to my mind. It's such a simulation of a real, instance of life, time frame.
Yeah.
I get kind of overwhelmed with like, oh my gosh, what do I need to know? Who are these people? What type of backstory stuff is important? Because in an adventure game, it's just different versions of pixel hunts in a way, whether it's information or whether it's a literal pixel or whether it's, something, some clue. So you can just get, which will get to my structure, what I love about the structure of the game later that helps you with that. But yeah, so anyway, and before the first puzzle, I just wanted to say like the first, I guess I'll call them cutscenes that come up.
When you're in Paris. Yeah.
You immediately see the rotoscoping in action. You see Tyler looking out. Oh, I forgot about the motorcycle scene until this moment.
Yeah. I wondered, and I was looking this up today. I couldn't find a definitive answer, but I was like, I wonder if this is why Quadrilateral Cowboy starts with you on a motorcycle, which is a 2016, I think, Blendo game. He made it's one guy, I forget his name. 30 Flights of Loving. I don't know if you know.
I know of them. Yeah.
As well as other things. But Quadrilateral Cowboy starts with you like chasing a train on a motorcycle. There were two other people on motorcycles as well, and so it's not exactly the same. But thinking of that today, I was like, I wonder if that's why he did that. Like, I'd have to go track down if he's written, notes about the game.
Well, it's just like, it's set the in the station in Paris. There's, you're watching all of these people walking by. The rotoscoping's happening, so you have this weird pseudo video happening, which is really stylistic and neat. And he's like very suspiciously looking out of the door, on the train, waiting for it to leave. And you see people, and you're like, which one of these people? What do I need to retain from this scene?
Right.
And there's no dialogue. It's just you hear chatter, and then the train leaves.
You basically hear the conductor saying, "Hey, we're leaving." Well, it's actually the intercom is basically in French first, and then in English saying, "Get to your cars."
Very authentic, right? And it feels like you're there. And then this motorcycle scene happens where then Robert is jumping off of a motorcycle, trying to get to the train. I guess because he's wanted by the police. And then, by the way, who was that woman who was driving the motorcycle? Now that I think about it,
She is, well, I would guess because she has red hair that she's meant to be a fine Irish lass who has helped him escape the troubles in Ireland where he is wanted for murder.
Sure. Yeah, I guess you can make that assumption, but
that's my guess. She actually has a name, and I think it is Irish sounding.
Irish, yeah. But I don't know. Maybe she does come back, but
no. That's
it.
She that's it.
She's such a funny. Yeah. But I mean, they had to film that scene, so that's hilarious. So it's just, I don't know. Like, it's, we already know there's inspiration from Agatha Christie and Murder on the Orient Express and all that kind of stuff. But it was so surprised as this game starts. And then to get to your point, which you asked about originally, and I've made the podcast too long with these points. You find Tyler, your friend's cabin, and he's dead.
Yeah.
And then you're like, yeah. So go ahead. Or did you ask me a question that I forgot already?
No. I just wanted to, kind of start setting the stage. And I guess I want to get immediately into the fact that puzzles have multiple solutions, and that that the solutions are they're pretty intuitive, but now I want to pull on other threads. So we'll come back to that.
I think we're going to be doing 2 episodes of that.
Yeah, at least. But we've put the hook in now for the listener of like, there's a dead body. What did Tim do? What did Brett do? Let's come back to that. Because, as you were talking about it, it's set at, it starts in a real train station. They actually went to that train station and took photographs. Nice. Jordan Mechner, he was actually living in Europe at the time. They actually went and tracked down real train cars remaining from the original Orient Express, most of which had been destroyed in the war and chopped up. But they managed to find like a passenger car in Italy, I think. So they were able to actually go on an actual. I mean, it was very broken down. It was a mess, but they went and took a bunch of photographs just to get a sense of it. So when we were talking about like specificity of time and place setting, like this is set on a specific date of 1914, 4 days before World War I breaks out. I mean, nobody does that, and it's that kind of attention to telling a very specific story, that I think really is why this sets it so far apart from everything else, that was going on at the time. Nothing else is anywhere near that accurate. The Orient Express ran from the late 19th century until basically it started winnowing down from 1977 on, and finally closed entirely in 2009. But by then it was a shadow of its former self. Basically, after 1977, the route kept getting shorter and shorter. They didn't go to Istanbul anymore, and then it started in Strasbourg after that, and eventually it was just like Strasbourg to Vienna, but they still called it the Orient Express. So more research to happen today.
Wow.
But it was. Yeah, but it was, it was also the setting of a, famous Agatha Christie novel. This is not going to have the same solution. There was at one point a thought that it might be made into a film, this game, as well, by none other than Paul Verhoeven.
Remind me?
RoboCop?
Okay.
Basic Instinct, I think. No, maybe not Basic Instinct. RoboCop, what else did he do? Oh, Starship Troopers. Most recently, he did, like L, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and
okay, well, perfect fit for this. Then
no, actually, he's done a lot of interesting stuff, and actually, before he did those kind of bombastic Hollywood movies, he did movies in Europe. I mean, he's I believe Belgian or German.
RoboCop isn't. Yeah, I mean that's. I guess.
RoboCop's a great movie. Starship Troopers is a great movie.
Starship Trooper also. Yeah. So it's the more interesting side of those sorts of movies, which is great. Yeah. Well, I can see why. I mean, even I'm only probably halfway through, but the true ending. Let's hope that I can see why it would. it could be an idea for a movie.
Yeah. It's very rich. It's very specific. The characters are, well, we'll get to all of that. Anyway, back to the murder, the first murder, maybe. Because I don't know. I didn't get as far as you. So what did you do with your poor dear friend Tyler Whitney?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I did was pull the brake.
Oops. Game over.
Yeah, which is game over. I was like, oh, you can pull the brake. How cool. What happens? And then it was like, yeah, and then the cops show up. And so there was that. But then I learned, because the brake's everywhere, so you can pull it anytime and lose, I'm sure.
Yes.
Although I really hope there's a puzzle at some point where you have to pull it, and do something. But anyway, yeah, so I think I just kind of accidentally, after that, which was just more of an experiment, I realized, well, this is my friend. I'm probably going to get in trouble. I should throw him out the window.
Okay.
and then, of course, his coat is conveniently hanging there. So, and I had blood all over me. So as even though I was trying to put myself in the mindset of a kind of, melodramatic story, in that I would feel terrible doing this to a body. If I just found my friend who I'm coming here to visit and meet up with, if I just found his body, throwing him out the window seems a little bit far-fetched. But if I was putting myself in the shoes of this sort of the tone of this thing, I was like, yeah, that's exactly what they want me to do. So that's what I did.
Okay. I also did that. However, it is also possible to put him in the bed.
Oh, wow. Okay, that makes sense.
And then you have to throw him out later. And, you want, so I happened to open up I wanted to know, because I knew there was another way to do this, and that's actually how I had solved it on the iPad back in whenever I played it, whenever it came out on the iPad. I had not thrown him out the window. I had put him in the bed. After several times failing already, because I went out in the hallway with blood on me. It's like a number of, you have to it's sort of akin to something like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy text adventure game, famously an incredibly difficult game because you constantly fail. But it had an incredibly rich hint system, so you could basically just constantly ask for hints and get through the whole
trial and error failure, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Which was part of the reason why I kind of set this aside at the time. That I played it. Because I was like, oh man, this is big and complicated. It needs more my
version has like a rewind feature.
That is a built-in feature to the game as originally shipped.
Okay, well that helps though.
It helps a lot, yeah, and we should definitely talk about that. I mean, do you ever want to rewind time?
Oh boy, yeah. Well, time. I guess there's a theme there.
I should rewind time because it's. Do you ever wish you could rewind time?
Oh boy.
Yeah, no. I mean, this is a precursor to Prince of Persia and the Sands of Time.
Right. Yeah, there's a prince coming up in the story with a sword.
Yes, there is also a prince, but that's not what. I mean, this is literally Jordan Mechner came up with the mechanic for the Sands of Time, and this is him using the same mechanic in an adventure game in 1997.
Yeah, well, it's okay.
So.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, that's another topic. We've got 20 topics here already. So a couple things, and I just wanted to bring up this initial puzzle first because it's first, but more importantly, there are a number of things that change as a result. Because as I was saying today, I looked up the strategy guide because I remembered I had solved this problem differently. And I didn't remember how. And so I looked it up. I was like, oh, there was a strategy guide. Wow, adventure games didn't normally get strategy guides. And I downloaded it, and it was 220 pages. And I was like, that's like half the length of Skyrim's strategy guide. Maybe not quite, but around that. And I was like, that's wild. And so I read basically up to Epernay, which is what I had played at the point that I looked up this manual. Again, more research than usual. So, a couple things that happened as a result. Did you hear the little kid Francois talking in the hallway afterwards?
Yeah, that he saw a dead man.
Exactly. Yeah, a dead man out the window. So that, of course, doesn't happen if you hide him in the bed.
Somebody else later talks about the fact that I think on the next stop, maybe after the next stop,
exactly.
There's some adults talk about finding a body. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, the police won't board the train and search the train if you didn't throw the body out.
Oh, wow.
So
that's incredible.
That kind of gives you parameters of what's going on with this game. It's like there is variability.
Yeah. But you have to eventually sleep in the bed. So that must be
you do eventually have to throw them out, but no police will come post Epernay because people are asleep.
Yeah,
so they won't see the body when it goes out the window.
Oh, wow. The flowchart for this as an adventure game is a fascinating thing too. Yeah. Like we were talking about the complexity of it, the alternate different tendrils and options and endings and things.
So apparently, to sort of describe implementation wise, it's a lot of state machines that are advancing on their independently. Mm-hmm. And then, so it's not really
Which
a
makes sense
chart.
For the NPCs, because the NPCs in each chapter have things that they're doing.
They have things that they're going to do that you can basically interrupt and cause them to go into a different area of the state machine, right? Or whatever, branch into a different part of the state machine.
I get real uncomfortable when someone walks up to me in the hallway because they're right, they come up right in your face and they're like, excuse me, monsieur, pardon me. And I'm like, you're too close to me.
Yeah. It's very uncomfortable. Dining room can be that way as well, where you're like, standing right over this person's table while they're eating.
And they look but I made a note of that because when you're standing there staring at these people, they have the animation actually occasionally they look up at you like, what are you looking at me for? Stop looking at me. We're trying to eat. So they even acknowledge that a bit, even though they should say, sir, please stop staring at me.
Yeah, exactly. But, I mean, some of that I think is admitting it's a human being on the other side of, playing something that's, it's going to be a little weird. Like it wouldn't work in reality, but, it works.
But at least they acknowledge it versus just ignoring, like you're not a ghost, so, yeah.
I don't even know where to, I feel like branching this game, this podcast recording is like, I don't know.
You were talking about, where to go next. I mean, I do want to talk about structure some of the game in general, but is there anything about the puzzle branching that you wanted to hit, or
not at this point? But I mean, when I went, having gotten to Epernay, and avoided the police by going out the window, did you do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Apparently, there's another thing you can do. There are other safe places on the train. You can be in with the prince, I think, is one of them. Mm-hmm. And I think there's something else in another car, but I don't remember the other ones. The other one, because I didn't read it in detail. I was just like, what is the other solution to this? Oh my God, this is 220 pages.
Well, it's interesting. Like if you go into the bathroom,
it might be
there's a cupboard. I tried that actually. Though.
Yeah, I thought can you go in the cupboard?
No, it's too small. But then there's also there's luggage storage, so you can look up and down. So I assume in one of the bathrooms you're going to have to look up in the luggage storage or under the cabinet. Also, strangely, you can look at the. I guess I don't think they're lights. They're maybe
glasses.
The little glass hole. Yeah,
they're holders for actual glasses.
Okay, yeah. Then there's also something that's hanging that you can look at too, like a glass thing that's hanging. It looks like a little lamp, but
I think that's the light for the bathroom.
Yeah. And you have a match that So
you have a matchbook. You also have the article.
A matchbox.
Excuse me.
It's going to come. Well, I only mention it because it's
going to come up for me.
It's really important to you.
And you have the newspaper clipping about the event that Robert is fleeing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, the fact that you could read as much of the newspaper as you could.
Yeah.
Just a stand. I mean, it's just all there, and you're like scrolling, and you're turning the page. So,
yeah. I wanted to another thing in that interview, the specificity. I don't know because I haven't gotten to this. You got to the first full day, right? The next day.
Mm-hmm. I think
Was it raining?
I don't recall. I feel like I remember hearing thunder. Maybe.
Okay. Yes. So, if you look out the window, it's raining. They render it raining, and you know why they did that? Because on that day in 1914, in the real world, it was raining all across Europe. That's the level of attention to detail they went to with this game. That's how specific this game is. It is. I mean, I cannot say enough how remarkable it is. And it's like, I know we talk all the time, like, I'm definitely going to finish this game. And then, like, I'm probably going to spend a lot of time with this game because I'm just like, I can't believe that this game exists.
It's a case study in many ways of something. It's like a time capsule. I don't know. It's like it's some encapsulated artifact of game development, right? Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to talk. There's so many things I want to talk about. We're already at 45 minutes. We haven't actually talked about the rotoscoping. We talked kind of obliquely, but we should definitely hit it here in the first episode because it's this is ostensibly our how we got to this game. They did invent kind of a new technique to do this, but it's fundamentally rotoscoping in the end. I mean, it's more like how they use the data and how they had to manage it so that they could bring it in fast enough from the CD-ROM and things like that. There's a lot going on to make some of these things happen. Required a quad speed CD-ROM too in 1997, which I think those were probably fairly common, but not everybody had one for sure. My first PC had a single speed.
It's just funny to think about CD-ROM
quad speeds. There was an 8X as well. I think I don't remember going higher than that.
That was the thing that we had to worry about.
In fact, in the manual there are like notes about like depending on how your CD-ROM works with your drivers, like you may have different sorts of issues. I can't even imagine like the headache that they would have had to deal with had it not only sold 100,000 copies. But I also wish we lived in a world where Robert Kath went on to have additional adventures, which was originally planned. That was a thing at the time as well, right? Obviously,
Gabriel Knight.
Yeah, Gabriel Knight, Laura Bow, and Phantasmagoria. I feel like there was a second game in that series as well.
I think so.
Yeah, I can't remember what it was called. That might be the game I was thinking of that came out this year. Was the second one in that series? Might have been just Phantasmagoria 2, for all I know, but I don't remember. Anyway, you mentioned the look. You want to kind of describe it? I keep jumping in with stuff that I learned today. So
no. Well, I mean, I think that so. You mentioned they took pictures to talk about the environment before hitting the characters, but so they probably rebuilt the train in CG, right? And then rendered.
Yes, it was 3D modeled. Yeah, 3D modeled.
Yeah. So on top of that, you have the rotoscoped characters, but I don't know the technique. I'm interested to hear what you found out about that because with Prince, like because it's a 2D game. I guess Another World was closer to this than because it's more cinematic, but
right.
Because of the nature of the train and because they're simulating a sort of first-person, three-dimensional perspective, even though it's all 2D essentially, is 2D, the way that they kind of have a screen door effect with transitions between the rotoscoping poses and animations as they like move, if that makes sense. I don't know. It's really fascinating because, obviously the end result is it looks like an rotoscoped animated movie, like The Hobbit or something. in a cool way. But it's so fascinating because it's rendered on top of this 3D background.
Right.
So the best example is when you see somebody walk away from you down the main hallway of the cabins of the train. You see, so they obviously get smaller as the perspective as they move down, but it's rotoscoped, so their animations are very smooth, and it like the gait of their walk is like very accurate and has a lot of character to it. And they've chose really like stark colors for every character, so you always can tell people apart. And it's flat shaded color, right? So it's a very just a block of color of a few different colors. And then this character is just like animated character. It's like you're inside a cartoon. You're watching them walk away from you. It's just fat. Or like I said earlier, what's more terrifying is when they're walking towards you. Because you're like, I can't move. What am I going to do? I can't do anything. And then they kind of like, and then the animation, like what they filmed is they kind of like sidle up. You can imagine yourself just like you would be in a train as they they kind of get on their side and they get their back to the wall, and then you're doing this. You imagine you're doing the same thing, and their face gets really close to your face, and you're like, "Oh, this is creepy." And then it's like almost too cool, you know?
Yeah, it really is. It really pushes the boundaries.
It's unlike anything. Yeah.
It's also, it should be said. I mean, we haven't talked about this at all. That when you're in those hallways, the aspect ratio is pulled in.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So you're seeing, like, in fact, when I started on the iPad, like, I mean, I had just seen the opening cutscene and seen that it was full screen, and then went into the hallway after throwing him out the window, and it was, it had these big black bars on the side. And of course I was in, landscape mode. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh man, this is broken because they made it for like the iPhone. But no, it's not. Like I literally was like, oh, this is not going to feel right because it's going to be, it's going to be these black bars on the side. But then I walked in the dining room and it's like, and it widens back out again,
Wow.
So they it uses that claustrophobia as well, deliberately to reflect the physical space of the 3D space, which is a real thing,
That's wild. It was ahead of its time for TikTok. Yeah,
that's right. I want to see the I don't know 2-hour TikTok playthrough of this in 1 increment chunks. 1 minute increment chunks, I should say. The look is really, like I don't have a lot really technically to add, other than, they did have to deal with compression and 3D translation, effects. I mean, that's not really that different from what Scum was doing, right? I mean, Scum would take one sprite and like shrink it down appropriately as it went, deeper into a scene or what have you, based on the walk boxes, and they kind of paint depth over the scene. In this one, I don't think they actually do that. I think they're doing literal like cards,
just
in the screen, that are pushed in. I don't know how they, I would assume they're just doing alpha over the top so that it can be a fixed size, but of course those things actually have to change size based on the animation as well. So there's there's got to be additional data as well.
Not only that though, but the other thing that I tested a lot, which the reason that I wanted to give the example of watching somebody walk away is you can chase them.
Yes, exactly.
And it compensates obviously as you're getting closer. So it I don't know if it backs up the sprite for that size, right? Because it wants to give you the impression that you're getting closer. It's just such a weird set of problems that I can't think of anyone else having to deal with. Maybe Another World, but Another World, unless it was the Another World doesn't count because when they changed the perspective, it was in a cutscene. You didn't have control.
Correct.
They would fool with it, but when you had control, you were always in that pretty much that same perspective.
Exactly.
So it doesn't. So that was closer to Prince when it comes to this problem. And the thing about you're right that Scum, Curse of Monkey Island specifically, did probably deal with some transforms at some times, but my memory of it was most of the time he's pretty much the same.
Oh yeah, almost all the time he's the same size, but the engine was capable of it automatically.
Yeah.
Like you didn't have to do anything extra. I'm sure it may not have been in the first game or whatever. Like, but at some point, Scum as a system just supported the walk boxes had Z values in the corners or something like that. I don't remember how that was done, but Ron Gilbert has written about all of that stuff a ton, so I'm sure that information is available on the internet. They may have actually done separate boxes for Z distances, because it would kind of step down in size, right? Obviously,
Well, yeah, but I think my point is that the way that those,
but the camera doesn't move,
the way those adventure games were, they weren't usually first. I mean, Myst was first person, so that's maybe a closest example. And in fact, I saw on the wiki that Myst was an inspiration for this game, but but in Sierra and LucasArts games, the scenes were the camera and the scenes were designed in a very specific way to support the kind of adventure game that it is. This is trying to simulate you're actually on the train. Yeah. And the 3D spaces like Myst are trying to simulate that.
And you're mostly first person.
You're mostly first person. So, you turn to the right and there's a door in front of you. You can open the door, go through the door, so there's like that sort of relativity is all pretty accurate. But then you have these crazy animated sprite people walking around and sitting and, and eating dinner and looking at you, and there's a lot of contextual animation that is based on what you do, of course. I don't know. It boggles my mind, to be honest. I wouldn't even know. But I want to mention specifically the transitions because I don't know. It's like they would do. I'm making some assumptions here based on not having any idea how this is built, but they would have the video shoot of certain actions that people would do. And so say somebody's like drinking tea and then they start reading the newspaper. And those are two different scenes that they filmed. They didn't film them together. So
probably from multiple angles.
Right. And so they're trying to get but they need the character who is sitting there to do both things, one after the other. So they have this kind of, I'm calling it a screen door effect because we use that term in other places in 3D rendering that isn't probably fair here, but there's sort of like a screen door effect that happens in the transition to get them from the tea drinking to the newspaper. And it's like basically a crossfade, but it's not a crossfade.
Right.
But it works okay, right? I buy it. And I know intellectually that they're two different scenes they've blended together, but I don't mind because it feels like it fits within the aesthetic of this sort of like, it does remind me of that Linklater movie to some degree.
Waking Life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or Scanner Darkly.
Scanner Darkly. Yeah.
Those are the two. He made two of them.
Yeah. I don't think I saw Waking Life, but
I highly recommend it. One of my favorites.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I like Scanner Darkly, but, yeah. So anyway, it's as you can hear, everybody, we're having.
Do you ever wish you could rewind time?
It's just a fascinating game.
We will talk about the rewinding time and multiple endings and how many different ways you can fail, and
I want to talk about the structure of the macro game and the train, the structure of the world, basically, as I'm always obsessed about that. Even though this isn't a level design, I mean, it has level design, but it's not traditional.
Yeah, no. I mean, when you're representing a real train, right? I mean, kind of somewhat limited.
It's limited, but there's also
you still have to make choices. Yeah,
there's a choice they made there on. We're going to make an adventure game on a linear train, right? Yeah. So day after day, location after location, and so being a very intentional decision. Obviously, they chose to make a game on. It's the chicken or the egg question for me of like, did they want to make a game about the Orient Express? And was the train really a big part of it? Or did, where did all those decisions come from? Which we may never know, but.
Oh no, anyway. He wanted to make one about the Orient Express. So, that's a known thing.
Well, and so the fact that he did, what I mean is, which I said poorly is, okay, he wanted to make a game about Orient Express. How much of the constraints that come with making a game about a train
Oh, drove the design.
Drove the adventure game design.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because the train is going in one direction on the track itself.
Right.
So you have these sort of sense of built-in days and locations, which are great chapter headings. Again, I'm like 4 chapters in or something. But you get a sense of completion, and then moving through the train, right? Like there's this thoroughfare when, like other adventure games we've mentioned, it's generally a linear approach, but every screen is an exploration moment. And then, you're kind of in Monkey Island's case, you're on an island or multiple islands and you're exploring the island. Here it's like move back and forth and,
right. Well, here you're not just exploring space; you're exploring time.
Yeah,
and that comes the other influence I saw cited, which I know you haven't played, but we have talked about, is Deadline, which is the Infocom mystery game. Is their first non-Zork game, which is about a murder mystery. It's a cozy, right? It's a cozy murder, which also advances time. With characters having their own agendas and movements and responses if you do things. And even Deadline, I don't think was the first to do that. I think it's just the best early, well-known example. I don't think it was the first one. And that was another inspiration for this game. It's different in that time does not advance automatically. It is not quote unquote real time, and this one sort of is. It's not real time.
I don't use the rewind unless I fail. So I don't know if you mean that in this game he's meaning for you to use it more, like going back.
Well, no. What I mean is that because everybody's got schedules, you can only be in one place, right?
Yeah.
But something might be happening in the next card that's only going to happen at this time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. So as a player, there are 6 game save slots. We're getting way into this more than I was gonna. We'll finish this a little bit and then we'll come back to it next week. We will in fact rewind time. There are 6 game save slots. Yeah. Each one of them is a different colored Fabergé egg for the rewind time mechanic. And I think part of the thinking for that is like you can be exploring in multiple saves at the same time, basically the same events.
Jeez.
To explore, because when I've talked about Deadline in the past, I've said it's an extremely difficult game because you basically have to play it multiple times. To memorize to be in different places. Like just because at noon 3 things might be happening. Which one is important? Well, you don't know until you've seen all 3. So you kind of have to replay again and again and again and build up that canonical run. Sort of like we were talking about with Prince of Persia last week, which is like I'm going to do this and execute it well all the way through. So you're sort of exploring the story, both the space, but the space is fixed. So you can learn the map pretty fast. Obviously, super fast in this game. It's 12 compartments and 4 cars and whatever. It's very fast to learn. 5 cars, and so that part is actually pretty easy. But where you need to be, you might have clues at any point. Like, oh, I just saw these people come back. Well, where were they before? Did I miss something there? And so the big exploration is not necessarily the space like it is in most games. It's what's happening. It's the synchronicity of it all.
Yeah. And taking it day by day too. Each day being a kind of a new set of things. Yeah.
I also
get a really sense.
So when I failed.
Yeah, well, and you'll be interested to hear as you play further. But the other thing I love about it, because of the setting and the context for everything, is you get having done some train travel in my life, which I really enjoy. You get a sense, because you're with these passengers for multiple days and multiple locations. There's this sense of a train trip, a long train journey that is super unique, versus something like Myst, where you're kind of wandering around an island, right, and just kind of discovering stuff. But this is a journey, right, where things are going to happen. Right. It's really fascinating.
Yep. All right. Well, let's put a pin in it there. Return to it next week. Rewind time, as it were, and we'll carry on with this one. I was saying, over the course of the last couple of days, I think we're going to want more time with this one. I
had no idea how much research you did, so that's explains.
Yeah.
I was kind of like, I get it, but what do you mean? What are you talking about?
When your back is out and you're spending a lot of time lying on the floor, certain things are open to you and certain things are not. Yeah. So, the podcast audience gets the benefit of that rare bit of research that we do for the podcast. I'm not going to promise to ever throw out my back again for the podcast, but it happens. I might as well make use of it. Let's hit one email just because I know, we've got a couple lined up and I don't want to let them languish too long, especially as they're topical in some cases. And this one that we got was in particular, and I think it touches on something that we talked about a lot. I mean, he references Prince of Persia, but that, you specifically talked about last week quite a bit. So you should read the email and then we can talk more about it.
Okay, email. Dear Brett and Tim, I really enjoyed your chat about the original Prince of Persia. Not being a dev myself, I lack the expertise to talk about these things very well, so I apologize in advance for saying things that either don't make sense or that are just phrased poorly.
Don't worry about it. Tim does it all the time.
Oh, my goodness. It's fine. I'm the worst. I don't even know if English is my first language. How do you decide or tweak animation priority versus responsiveness when making games? Oh, boy. Have you ever seen...
And worms everywhere.
Have you ever seen during the course of making a game a player action get changed radically from one end of things to the other? Where do you see the Arkham games lying on that animation versus responsiveness spectrum? What about R2D2? Wait.
R2.
Oh, Red Dead Redemption. I was like, I read that as R2D2 very quickly.
Yeah.
Red Dead Redemption 2. The Rockstar games are a whole other thing. I think those are each surprisingly close to pop. Sometimes giving the player less the feeling that they are the character on screen and more that they're queuing up actions to drive that character, like a vehicle with its own physicality and inertia. Not an unpleasant feeling once you get used to it, but it can be initially off-putting when you're coming from games with snappier actions. Thanks for taking the time to read and for the great pod and games. Ben Saracen, Berkeley, California. P.S. I find that queuing up actions that drive a body that's slow to respond seems more and more natural with each passing year.
So do we. Especially the last couple of weeks, where it's like every motion has to be planned. So I mean, the guts of the question or something we talked about last week is, you have to plan ahead because he's going to plant this foot. You got to be ready. You're going to make your jump or what have you. And there's control taken away. I don't think either of us have played Red Dead Redemption 2. I know I haven't.
I played some. I'm actually about to finish Red Dead Redemption 1.
Okay.
But I haven't played a lot of 2. So because I wanted to finish 1 first. But
okay, good.
But I know
you have that disease. We share that.
Yeah, I think I know what he's asking about, even though I haven't played a lot of Red Dead 2. Because it is, like I said, it is a Rockstar conundrum to some degree.
Yeah. Yeah, so how do you decide, Tim? How do you tweak animation priority? You've mostly been involved in first person. Well, that's not true because Tomb Raider. Never mind. Forget I even said that.
No, I mean it's a big huge which I think has been talked about quite a bit for the Crystal Tomb Raider games. So I'm not going to be the expert to talk about it, but I can give insight because of the reboot, because I have vivid memories about our transition there, which I was definitely helping to spearhead. Brandon Fernandez was another person that was pushing for it. I'll explain a little bit more about that. But I mean, the macro answer for me, unfortunately, it's kind of a cop-out answer / easy answer in that it is highly dependent upon the vision of the game itself, like what the goals of the game are. Because there are times when, and I guess the reason he's probably bringing up Red Dead is, and I would say Rockstar Games in general, is that they put a priority on the fidelity and sort of realism, quote unquote realism /
heightened realism.
Heightened realism. And we probably talked about this somewhat with the GTA 3. Well, though GTA 3 was much more liberal.
GTA 3 is not the best example.
They just kept going more and more cinematic and more quote unquote, real simulator. Rockstar has. And Red Dead, I think, is from playing so much Red Dead 1, and to be honest, to his question, I sit there sometimes and play that game, even though it's older than Red Dead 2, of course, and I just run around in circles and figure eights watching the character because I want to see what they're doing.
Yeah.
And there is some allowance for responsiveness, but a lot of times they are fighting the player because they want things to feel grounded, and they want you to feel like the character's real, and
they want you also to feel like you're in a Western.
Yeah. And there's a sacrifice.
They're chasing a Hollywood ideal.
Yeah. And there's a sacrifice that comes with that. It becomes more authentic and more simulation based, and you feel that, and you like it for that reason. But I think mechanically, often those games don't live up for me because of my preference as a player when I like mechanics to be. So that brings me to Tomb Raider, in that with the reboot, one of the biggest debates we had, which I think I've talked about on the podcast before, coming from Tomb Raider Legend and Tomb Raider Underworld, which were sort of the previous model. I will call it the first reboot being maybe a Legend, and then that was coming over from the core games. When she jumped off of a ledge, there was a sort of a calculation that happened that ensured that the animation, which were beautiful, would play in a very specific way so that jump looked amazing, and she would grab the ledge right at the right time. It was still fairly easy to execute, and it was player forward, in that you just had to press the button kind of at the right time, which was similar but more forgiving than the originals. But the animation would play and has been mocapped and just perfectly animated to hit that arc perfectly. So every time you do it successfully, it looks amazing. But once you're in the air, you're committed. It's happening. You've left, and the animation is going to play, and you don't really have agency at that point. So with the reboot, fundamental thing that we changed that I think the team has talked about a lot too is air steering and responsiveness, where we're okay sacrificing some of that. Maybe the footfall isn't precisely perfect when you turn, but because you can turn on a dime and it's not on a dime. It's not like a Mario situation. There was still some simulation feel to it, but it was much more forgiving. And then when you're jumping in the air, of course, mostly people can't steer themselves in the air in real life.
I can barely do it on the ground.
But it felt better to us, and it feels better in our opinion, to the modern audience, to give you much more agency to correct, but it also changes the way you design those jumps, right? Because the player has control. While with Tomb Raider Legend and Underworld, metrics were king, right? That's every metric had to be precise because that animation was going to play the same way every time. So it was very binary. You look at a wall and you're like, okay, I can see the path. I know what I'm going to do. Versus like in the reboots, it was much more, there's a path, but you have some slop in there, right? And Batman, I think, was in the middle there too, where I think he still looks great when he's animating, but just because I have a bunch of games I'm almost done with. I'm almost done with Arkham Knight. I still think he feels good when he's moving, and I still feel like I have a lot of responsiveness.
Yes.
But I do think they prioritize responsiveness most of the time with him.
Yeah.
Because, you can like zip line at a moment's notice, and he just kind of leaves the ground.
Yeah.
And if you watch his character and his animations, there's a lot of like clipping, and there's a lot of like things that are kind of hand wavy, but you don't care. You're just like Batman.
Yeah. I mean, basically it's a question of like how forward is mechanics versus, fidelity, character fidelity. I think with Batman specifically, Arkham specifically, my thinking is like, there is no world in which this is remotely physically accurate, like in terms of actual physics. Like his changes of momentum would require him to have muscles that were made of I don't know, some super string, and then besides that being impossibly strong. I mean, he's really, really built as well. Like he's massive. Like I can almost believe it more with Lara because she's lithe, and but Uncharted is another one, another series that has kind of sits in the middle there. It's kind of interesting because I feel like when they're in that kind of exploration traversal mode, they are closer, especially like climbing and things like that. They are a lot closer, to like RDR or Prince of Persia or the old Tomb Raiders, a lot of the time. And then of course you go into combat and it's different. You're like, it has to be more responsive because guys are going to shoot you, right? And so you have to be able to like, immediately turn on a dime. So I feel like they actually move the needle. And I would say that Arkham does that too, to some degree, but it's really, I mean, it's so responsive to like, flicking the stick around that, it feels like he turns way more on a dime even than
I did the same thing with him.
Yeah, I do that
where I just like run around in circles and and just kind of like see. And he, his cape covers a lot of it. I think sometimes because the cape is what you see.
Cape helps.
Yeah, he's just like his footfalls are just kind of all over the place, but. You don't care. You definitely don't care. Because I think when the player, that's what I think was sort of the minor discovery revelation during that transition in Tomb Raider that I was talking about, is that ultimately when the player has more control, they care less about that stuff. And that is some of the frustrations I have about some of the Red Dead stuff. Yeah. And I really love that. I love the world building of that and being, a cowboy in that game. But I think they kind of were too beholden to it, and they didn't need to be as much.
The other thing too is I think that when the character lines up so closely with the player's intention, that the player actually sees what they expect to see. So even if it's wrong, I mean, we analyze it, we sit there and like run them around in circles and like try, what if I zigzag at this point in the animation? What if I zigzag at that part? Like, but that's because we're
fill in the gaps.
We're nuts. Yeah. But I think that, players, because they're expecting to see something because they did a thing, they actually literally see that, and they don't see the mistakes. They don't see, I mean, they may see clipping, especially because of the cape will sometimes clip his body and things like that. And so you'll see the costume, so it's visually very apparent. But I think actually with animation, it's way less apparent. And you're also zoomed out in the times, in the combat specifically, when you would most notice it, because you're going back and you're doing 180s constantly, to hit guys across this field, and you're going full tilt this direction, and then you're going full tilt the other direction. And at that point, you're pulled out, and it's actually easier to not see it there as well because he's literally smaller, in the field of view, so that covers things as well. So that's another thing. But yeah, it depends on what your goals are for sure. Okay, well, thank you for that, Ben. Sent into devgameclub@gmail.com. We're going to come back next week, and we have another longish email, which I've got to edit a little bit for time, but we'll get to that, and any others that get sent in. Thanks for those. We also love to read your reviews when we get them. I keep an eye on the Apple Podcasts feeds, but if you've been putting them in any other place, please let us know, and we'll either check it out or ask you to mail it in. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com, on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Instagram at devgameclub. You can find us twitching at twitch.tv/Brett Duville and twitch.tv/
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
Did I get all the socials this time?
It's Threads. We're not on Blue Sky yet, but you're close. You're close. Yeah,
I'm getting better. I'm going to edit that right now because otherwise next week.
It doesn't. I'm going to put it on Blue Sky soon. I just haven't yet.
Future listeners.
But we're on Threads, yeah.
But we're on Threads. We also have a fan-run Discord, which you can find. There's a link in the show notes. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast, Aaron Evers, and our logo, that Discord, our merch store, all by Mark Garcia. Have fun figuring out if it's Istanbul, not Constantinople this week. And good night.
I knew you were going to do that. I tried to work it in somehow myself. I couldn't think of something.
Next week. Do you ever wish you could rewind time?
Nice.
And good night.
Oh yeah, and good night.
Even old New York was once New Amsterdam, Tim.
Oh, man. That is such a specific reference for the two of us. I feel like...
Why they changed it, I can't say. People just liked it better that way.
Yeah. Oh, my God. That song is so good.